I'm going to start with a simple observation, which I actually never thought I'd be able to make, which is that within the next 9 months, it's highly likely that 2 men and 2 women will be legally married in America. When I first started writing about the subject in 1989, actually, and 88, I wrote about it as an interesting, intellectual, and important, I thought, moral argument for the equality of gay men and women. But I never believed that within a decade I would be going around the country talking about a subject that was on the verge of becoming reality. This civil rights movement that I've been involved with, been privileged to be involved with, and seen grow yearly, almost daily, has come to a point in history where absolute legal equality for gay men and women in their relationships is imminent. It will provoke an enormous backlash. It will and has generated an extraordinary amount of debate. But no one in this room should be under any illusions that it isn't happening. It really is. It's happening in a small state called Hawaii, but battles about those marriages have taken place now 70 different times in 50 different states. In this state, California, 2 years in a row, marriage has been at the center of a legislative battle. Hawaii is the first of several states which will, I believe, be a part of a legal battle to recognize marriage. I think you will see in the next year to 2 years second and third fronts being opened up across the country in states with similar constitutions for similar recognition. Sometimes I'm asked, why this? Why this issue with respect to homosexuality among all the possible issues that there are? And my answer to this is almost definitional. Ask yourself, what is homosexuality? It is the emotional and sexual attraction of one human being to another of the same gender. I don't think even people who oppose me on this issue will dispute that basic definition. Just as heterosexuality is the emotional and sexual attraction of one human being to another of the opposite gender. Now ask yourselves, what is the most relevant political, legal, constitutional institution which is directly related to the emotional and sexual attraction of one human being to another? There's no competitor. There is nothing in our laws, in our culture, in our society that comes even close to being as directly related to this issue as the institution of marriage. The question that I ask myself is not, why is this subject now being raised with respect to homosexuality? The real question is, why has it taken us so long to reach the central and most relevant institution with regard to it? What kept gay men and women for decades from asking directly and succeeding directly in engaging this particular institution with regard to homosexuality? There are some who say, well, the main reason is the backlash that such a thing inevitably provokes. You don't bring this thing up. This is the one thing every politician is scared of. You can talk about homosexuality with respect to any number of issues, but marriage has a special place in our society. And the reason it hasn't been dealt with is because of the hostility and sure defeat that such an issue would provoke. Sometimes I feel like a kid in a big house, and there are many rooms in the house, and some of them you're allowed to mess around in and scuff up, and others you're supposed to be a little bit more careful about. And upstairs, act even more properly. But there's one room that you're really not supposed to go in. And your friends tell you, don't go in that room, only trouble will come from it. And your parents say, you can go anywhere you like, but don't go in that room. We'll even forgive you for other things, but don't go in that room. We have nothing against you, but whatever you do, don't go there. And ultimately, you begin to wonder, what is it about that room that I'm not supposed to see? And your curiosity gets the better of you, and you get into that room, and you find out why it is that you're not allowed in that room. And the reason is that in that room are the documents that prove that they own the house. And your name isn't on it. And it's not your house. And it's not your family. And you live there, and you breathe there, and you exist there, and you love there at the behest and discretion and tolerance of somebody else. Of course they don't want us to go there. You can always tell the thing most worth having. It's the thing they least want you to get. And there are those who say bringing this issue up, dealing with this issue, will set back all sorts of other issues with regard to gay men and lesbians. Discrimination from employment discrimination, freedom from violence, substantive benefits that come with something called domestic partnership, practical issues that affect people rather than this abstract concern. But of course, if you look at the evidence, there is no evidence that pursuing this issue, presenting it clearly, articulating its centrality, has in any way diminished or set back any other issues with regard to gay men and women. You look at the great Donnybrook last year on this issue in the Congress of the United States, where the Defense of Marriage Act went forward for passage. A bill that many of the gay rights organizations was the last thing they wanted to happen. And what happened? In the 104th Congress of the United States, with the biggest majority for Republicans and the most conservative Republican majority in generations, 49 votes in the Senate for employment non-discrimination, the biggest vote in history for another related subject. By moving the goalposts forward, by talking about absolute equality, other things fell in behind. People said, well, we can't give you this, but maybe we'll give you this. It's the most basic bargaining tactic imaginable. You go in with your highest bid and you see what else they offer. In Hawaii right now, a few weeks ago, in a grand compromise to put the issue of non-discrimination in front of the people in a year and a half, probably after the court has already ruled, the Senate, the more liberal Senate, said we're not prepared to put this constitutional amendment before the people for vote unless you guarantee in law the most extensive same-sex partnership benefits ever mandated in the United States. Health care, bereavement, insurance, a whole range of benefits that go with domestic partnership, which have now and are due to go into force in Hawaii in July. And do you know who was the chief lobbyist for the most extensive same-sex benefits package in America? Jay Sekulow, chief lawyer for the Christian Coalition. He was so desperate to stop marriage going through that he was prepared to support the next best thing for him, which was the most substantive benefits ever granted to same-sex couples in America. And people say that pushing for marriage will put back other issues. Do you think we would ever have come to that situation if we hadn't asked for marriage? I was in a debate only last night on that wonderfully erudite show, Politically Incorrect, with a gentleman called Floyd Brown, who's a talk show host and funder and founder of all the Clinton scandals, who charmingly referred to me at one point in the show as "you homos." But at one point on a debate about same-sex marriage, he said to me, so what's the problem with you having domestic partnership? Why aren't you satisfied with that? I said to him, you're in favor of domestic partnership? That's a very interesting situation. Do you think we would ever have got to such a situation where such a person had engaged this issue, understood the issue, talked about the issue, explained the truth about gay and lesbian relationships if we hadn't raised the issue of marriage? Never would that have happened. This issue has transformed and redescribed the civil rights movement in this country in a way that's put gay people and presented them as full human beings, people who love and live together and share responsibilities, rather than simply people who engage in some sexual behavior which defines their entire being and which their enemies has always defined them as such, in which some perverse act of pride, some people have historically said, yes, that's all we are. But it's not all we are, and never has been all we are, and marriage has redescribed gay people as the ordinary human beings that every single one of them is. Ask yourself for a second whether any heterosexual citizen of this society has conceived for a second that they had a right to the pursuit of happiness, which did not include the right to marry the person they love. How much deeper can it get in the ability to be a full and developed human being than the right to marry the person you love? Look at the precedents. One of the reasons I put this book together is to show the precedents. At times in history, people have tried to curtail the right to marry. States have said if you're a prisoner, if you're imprisoned, you've given up the right to travel or for free movement, you should not be able to marry in prison while you're there. It's one of the things one takes away from you as a consequence, especially if you have murdered your spouse, which is one of the particular injunctions. And the Supreme Court considered this and struck it down. Nothing could justify taking away such a fundamental right. The state of Wisconsin sought to forbid fathers who had not provided child payments to their children in their first marriage from remarrying a second time to continue the same mistake. And they said, we will not grant you another marriage license until you have paid those payments to your children from your first marriage. A kind of welfare reform for fathers. And the Supreme Court struck it down because it recognized that the right to marry is independent of and prior to any responsible performance of that responsibility, because it inheres in you as a human being and as a citizen before any other obligations or responsibilities are engaged in. If you are committed to a mental asylum and you are rendered and described as legally incompetent, you cannot buy a house, sign a contract, know who you are. The Constitution still guarantees you two rights, the right to vote and the right to marry. Because it understands that those rights are not premised upon even the capacity of the person to perform them, but on the very fact that he or she is a person with the capacity to choose even wrongly crazily, stupidly, irresponsibly. The absence of the right to marry for anybody in this society is a massive, binding, deafening statement that gay men and women in this society are not accorded even personhood in the face of the law, that they do not even get to the starting line of citizenship in the face of the law. And in the cultural ramifications of this, they do not get even to the starting point of human beings. Of course, the traditional response to this is, but you do have the right to marry. As Gary Bauer said to me once on television, find yourself a nice girl and settle down. It was, of course, said to African Americans before 1967. But you do have the right to marry. Just marry an African American. It's equally protected. You can marry. There's not even an equal protection issue here, because white people can marry white people, and black people can marry black people, and it's denied white people to marry black people just as it's denied black people to marry white people. We're fair and equal. But of course, what that ruling said in Loving versus Virginia is that that category of race is not what defines you as a human being. What defines you is the autonomy as a human being to choose whoever one wishes to marry. And our homosexuality doesn't guarantee us a right to marry, and our heterosexuality doesn't guarantee someone the right to marry. Your humanity guarantees your right to marry. A category beneath gender and sexuality and race, a human right and a citizen right. Of course, the other answer to that is I and my homosexuality is as integral to me as any person's heterosexuality is integral to them. When heterosexuals sometimes say to me, you know, I would like to get here, but I just don't understand it, my response is, yes, you do understand it. It is the same. The same needs, the same loves, the same stupidities, the same nobilities, the same aspirations. It is a human thing to love and be loved. And gay people that discover that they are gay don't do this out of some bizarre choice to engage in an alternative lifestyle. They do so because they are gay. And even those who struggle and fight and wish to rid themselves of this out of some extreme self-hatred can't do it because it is them. And they can only do it if they cease to be them. Which is why, of course, so many gay teenagers choose not to be them and kill themselves, because it is the only way they can stop themselves being gay. We have recently, of course, the latest example, a chief aide to Bob Dornan, his campaign manager, who loved this guy, supported everything he stood for. If anybody tried not to be gay, it was this man. And he couldn't. At what point are we going to be allowed not to have to defend ourselves as gay people from being compulsive liars in order to be part of this debate? This is the truth. It has to be the truth. Why would anybody choose otherwise? And there are some who say, wait. Just wait. The society isn't ready for this. It takes time. This is an idea whose time has not come. And there's a great answer to that. It's not given by me. It was written several years ago. It's a book called Why We Cannot Wait. It's by Martin Luther King Jr., a man who was also told, as many people in the gay community are now told, to keep his head down, not to push it. Life isn't so bad. The backlash created by demanding equality will be worse than the indignity that we now suffer. And for some people it was worse, because for some people it meant that they were killed. For some people it meant that they were fired. For some people it meant that they were blasted with water cannons, had their homes burnt and blown up. More than many gay people in the gay civil rights movement have yet endured. But of course, the integrity of human beings and the equality of citizenship is not something that can ever wait. The question is, why have so many generations have to endure it already? And there are some who also say that this is too bound up in religion, that this issue of marriage, this word of marriage, is too embedded in a religious consciousness that still profoundly accepts the immorality of gay people. So you are putting two concepts together that, in a society which is still predominantly religious, cannot go together, or they only go together at great stress and cost and social convulsion. And that is why we shouldn't confront this. And I think there are two answers to that consideration. And the first is, this is not a religious issue. This is a civil issue. This is a marriage license given by a registry office to people of any religion and none. It is a mark of citizenship, not of religious faith. That there is a separation between church and state, that marriage as a civil institution is clearly legally separate and morally separate from marriage as a religious institution. To give you one simple example, there is such a thing as legal and civil divorce. The Roman Catholic Church does not recognize divorce, and doesn't recognize, if you're married and get divorced, that you are divorced in the eyes of the church. But as a citizen, you are. As a person in a pluralistic liberal society with competing visions and views, you are divorced. Of course there is a separation between church and state here. And the other answer to that question is, yes, it is a religious issue. Absolutely. And gay people have a right to the sacred as well. And gay men and women have a right not to be excluded from their own faiths and their own churches. And that the sacredness of this bond is a sacredness guaranteed to human beings in the eyes of God. And that means all human beings. And there is nothing in the Bible and nothing in the Gospels to say that some human beings are to be excluded from that dignity. Yes, of course, there are biblical injunctions. I reproduce them in this book. But they come from a world where gay people were not understood to exist, where the notion of people who were involuntarily homosexual was not even there, in which homosexuality was understood to be entirely a sexual act engaged in, for some reason, by heterosexuals who had a choice and a calling to be something else. The Old Testament, if you take it literally, of course, also argues that gay people should be put to death, or that anybody engaging in these acts should be executed. That's the same verse that is always quoted by fundamentalists, and yet they do not support, at least most of them, the death penalty. So literalism is not complete, and there is inconsistency in that literalism. And 3 verses later it says that thou shalt not mix unclean beast and fowl with clean beast and fowl. It is an abomination. The same word in the Hebrew as that with regard to homosexual sexual behavior. And yet Pat Robertson and Ralph Reed are not kosher. They have decided to interpret these texts according to their own experience and decisions and moral argument and understanding of what these things mean. And as such, we have a right to be engaged in arguing, as I think we are in the churches, that this does not mean what it has been said to mean, and that gay people have a right to be a part of this as human beings in all respects, including the sacredness of holy union. I want to conclude on that note and by reading something. This is a same-sex union ceremony from the 8th century. The church, people may be surprised to know, did not have a sacrament for marriage until the 8th century. 800 years of Christianity went by before it was understood to be a religious issue to marry people. It was supposed to be a civil issue, which the church might or might not bless. It was essentially about paternity and ownership of women and children in a legal and civil sense, rather than some emotional marital union blessed by God. But in the 8th century, the church decided to move forward with that. And at the same time, and contemporaneous with that, they instituted another ceremony for people of the same gender. There's enormous dispute about whether this was a marriage or not. My own belief, and it goes against some of what else I'm arguing for, is that it wasn't a same-sex marriage. That it was some kind of other ceremony. And the book gives you all the arguments on both sides of that issue. But the words themselves bespeak a world and an idea in which gay people are understood to be human in a way that I think resonates with the salience and importance of this issue, in which sexuality and sex is not seen at the center at all of homosexual life. In fact, at that time, heterosexuals were understood to be more interested in sexual activity than gay people, because they had to procreate, and they were supposed to be more carnal than gay people. Here's the prayer anyway, and translated it from the Greek. O Lord our God, who didst grant unto us all those things necessary for salvation, and didst bid us to love one another, and to forgive each other our failings, bless and consecrate, kind Lord and lover of good, these thy servants who love each other with the love of the Spirit, and have come unto this thy holy church to be blessed and consecrated. Grant unto them unashamed fidelity and sincere love. And as thou didst vouchsafe unto thy holy disciples and apostles thy peace and love, bestow them also on these, O Christ our God, affording to them all those things needed for salvation and life eternal. For thou art the light and the truth, and thine is the glory. And it concludes, then shall they kiss the holy gospel and the priest and one another, and conclude. So I'll end there.